Hi guys! Today I'm going to talk to you about something I'm currently obsessed with. It's a painting, actually, thought that seemed appropriate, and it's of St. George killing the dragon. I recently got to see this painting up close and personal at the Art Institute of Chicago, and I'd like to show it to you and give you a little background on it, and then explain why I think it's so fantastic. So first, here's the painting. Now, this painting was completed in the 15th century by a Spanish artist, Bernat Martorell. According to the Art Institute, he painted it in 1434, 1435, so we're talking about 580 years ago, give or take. We don't have a lot of information about Martorell, but we know that he lived and worked in Barcelona, which was at that time, and it continues to be, the capital of the Catalan region of Spain. And if you know a little bit about Spain, then you'll know that it's broken up into different regions and that they have different cultures and dialects in each region. For example, in Catalonia, they speak Catalan instead of Spanish. They're not actually into bullfighting at all. It's illegal in that part of the country, believe it or not. They love good fart jokes. I mean, who doesn't? But they're really, really into it in Catalonia. And most importantly, their patron saint is St. George or San Jordi. By the way, San Jordi or St. George is also the patron saint of a bunch of other places, but none of them have entire psychedelic buildings inspired by and dedicated to him, or at least none as magnificent as the Casa Batlló in Barcelona. So thank you, Antonio Gaudí. Now, like all good saints, St. George was a martyr. He suffered a horrible and gory death, which involved torture and laceration, and he was finally decapitated. However, the most famous story about St. George is how he slayed a dragon. So if you don't already know, the basic gist of it is this. There was this town, and it was being terrorized by a dragon. And to keep the dragon happy, the people of the town started feeding it sheep. And eventually they ran out of sheep, so what do you think they did? They started feeding the dragon their children. Now, you might think this is a terrible solution, but at least they were pretty democratic about it. They did it, they selected the children by lottery. So in other words, it was sort of like an olden days version of the Hunger Games. Very democratic. This went on for a while until finally the king's daughter got randomly chosen. And at this point, the king was like, no, hey guys, look, I'll give you all my riches and half my kingdom if you don't feed my daughter to the dragon. But the townspeople were like, nice try. You know how this works. Keep your gold and silver because your daughter is going to get eaten just like everyone else. Now, there are different versions of what exactly happens next. But either way, the king honored his people's wishes, and St. George rides by just before the princess gets chewed on, and he ends up killing the dragon, and he converts the entire town to Christianity as well. So that's right. Not only did he rid the town of a dragon, but he made sure all the townspeople were going to go to heaven when they died. So he was a pretty cool dude. Now, I personally like St. George because he's my namesake. I'm Georgina, and my family comes from Catalonia, and I like that San Jordi is basically the Spanish equivalent of Valentine's Day, because it's super romantic. But I also love St. George because his story has inspired so many artists' renditions of dragons. And because a dragon is obviously a mythical creature, artists across the centuries have gotten pretty creative in depicting them. So you see, when we think about visual art nowadays, we have so many different mediums and outlets to appreciate and consume it. We have museums, of course, but we also have the internet, books, movies, and we have the concept of art for art's sake, art that exists because it just exists. Just because some artist was inspired to make it, it doesn't even necessarily have to have a message. On the other hand, 15th century art pretty much always has a message, and there are two key factors to interpreting it. The first factor is that people are primarily concerned with religion. Why? Probably because living in the 15th century totally sucks. You have terrible food, terrible hygiene, everything smells, there's not a lot of entertainment, and death is everywhere. I mean, everywhere. So the best you can hope for is to pop out some kids, hope they don't die before they're old enough to help you with the day-to-day drudgery, and then you kick the bucket at the ripe old age of, 30. Even if you're lucky enough to be born into a higher class and you don't have to toil all your life, guess what? You're still going to die by the time you would qualify for like a 21st century midlife crisis. Of course, there's hope for you, in the 15th century. If you play your cards right, you'll go to heaven when you die, and then you get to live indefinitely in paradise, and that kind of makes up for the endless struggle that was your very short life. The second factor of interpreting 15th century art is, well, the vast majority of people are illiterate. They don't know how to read. And we already know that religion is important to them because you want to get into heaven, but you can't just pick up a book and learn how to be more like St. Catherine and less like the local tavern wench. So what do? You go to church. You hear sermons. You learn stories that involve morals and teach you how to better conduct yourself. And then, if it's a good church, they will also have these visual aids, these altarpieces, sort of up at the top of the church behind the priest. They're basically like the comic strips of their day. They show the lives of saints, the events that marked them, how they were born, and most importantly, how they died. Because most of the saints died pretty gruesome deaths. These altarpieces, they were also kind of titillating in a way. So we're talking about an age where the highlight of your week might be attending a public execution. So blood spatter was pretty standard entertainment. You might fall asleep during an especially long sermon, but these paintings definitely kept you coming back for more. Now, it bears noting that this painting of St. George was also part of an altarpiece, and that it was originally flanked by 4 other panels, which depicted, you guessed it, his judgment and the 3 stages of his, again, very gruesome death. But I would like to focus now on the painting at hand. So, what makes it so fantastic to me is the astounding attention to detail, the way it draws you in, the sumptuousness of the gold inlay and the 3D relief accents, and lastly, the composition and the factors that make it relatable, especially to someone living in the 15th century. At first, when you look at it, you might just see St. George and his golden halo. He's sitting atop a majestic white horse and he's about to plunge his spear into a dragon. But let's take a closer look. For starters, let's look at everyone's outfits. They are in 15th century medieval clothing. Now, while the tale of St. George harkens back to, I don't even know when, like the biblical era, maybe a little post-biblical era, but still, way before medieval era. This is the equivalent of Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, right? We're taking an old story and we're breathing new life into it by putting it in a contemporary setting, in this case, the 15th century. Now, other things. Check out the horse's expression. So St. George and the princess look almost bored, but this horse is freaking out. Like, it did not sign up for this at all. Its expression is more like it was just walking along, minding its own business, when all of a sudden it almost stepped right onto a dragon. Seriously, look at its eyes. Just look at them. Then let's look at this dragon. For starters, this is not a Game of Thrones, Ursula Le Guin, Tolkien type of dragon. It's not going to grow to be more than 50 feet long, and it doesn't spew fire like a flamethrower. In other words, this is a dragon I feel like I could even foreseeably slay, with the right amount of training and equipment. But the creativity that went into depicting this fantastical beast. It looks like Bernat Martorell took every animal he could think of, ones that he had actual access to in 15th century Spain, and he combined them. The dragon's head looks like a dog, but it has crazy spiked teeth, a long pointed tongue, and a nose that looks almost like a scorpion's tail, or that weird kind of turtle you may have seen with a really pointy long nose. It's very reptilian, the dragon, with its scales and its underbelly, but it also has bat-like wings with peacock feather decorations. It has bird-like claws, mammalian haunches, tiny little mouse ears. They're kind of cute, actually. It's got fur around its neck and a tail that almost looks like an octopus arm. And you can see the dragon's lair off to the right and a few small lizards who are just hanging out and watching the battle. I just love this detail. I don't know if it's supposed to be, the lizards are supposed to be a cousin of the dragon, or again, these are just some animals that you would see on a day-to-day basis in 15th century Spain, just sort of hanging out. So they're there. They're on the dragon's lair. You can also see the bones of various people and sheep that the dragon has devoured. And one of my favorite details on the painting, a tiny little fly, and it's either landed on the painting itself or on that scapula on the bottom left of the painting. And it's just a minor detail, but this sort of playfulness, this realism, if this doesn't make the painting relatable, I really don't know what does. Because this is obviously the artist just just plain, like this. There's no message behind the fly on the bone. It's really just he's showing off his skill. I don't know. I just think it's fantastic. And then if we go back into the composition, so you can see that the area around the dragon's lair is very arid. It's desert-like. It's devoid of life. It's been stripped by this terrible beast. But if you follow up into the background of the painting, you can see green starting to spring up, and you can see a fertile, organized little village and a castle where everything looks pretty much business as usual. And if you look all the way up to the top left, you can spot a tiny little farmer tending to his field. Like he's been left behind. He's the one guy that's just up there, you know, taking care of business while the dragon's devouring people. And there are even little tiny ducks and geese swimming in the castle moat and someone walking along the path next to the castle. And then there's the castle itself, where throngs of people, including the king and queen, have gathered to watch the combat between the dragon and St. George. And they're literally popping out of every balcony, rampart, and window. It's hard to make out their expressions. They all appear a little worried, but check out their crazy hats. They look like 15th century members of Devo. Like he's given each one of them a very particular chapeau. Anyway, finally we have the princess, the symbol of purity. And we know from the story that she was unwed when she was sent to be eaten. And some versions of the tale even have her going to her death in a wedding gown. You know, she's very virginal. In this painting, she appears, there's a sheep next to her, and she appears just as docile as the sheep by her side. She's totally innocent. She's ready to sacrifice herself to save the city, this poor innocent. Now, this martyr complex really kind of irks my 21st century sensibilities about, you know, strong, independent women. But the symbolism would not have been lost on the 15th century Christian, and the moral remains. Good conquers evil in the end, and the pure of heart, the princess, will be spared. Anyway, that's all for now. If you get the chance, the painting is on display at the Art Institute of Chicago. It's part of the newly reopened Gallery 237 and part of their Saints and Heroes Medieval Art Medieval Art Arms and Armor collection. It's a really beautifully curated installation, and I highly recommend checking it out if you get the chance. Thanks, guys. Bye.